Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today I'd like to share my thoughts with you on surviving the first 100 days of a catastrophic nationwide power outage. So let's get to it. So this will be the first in a series of videos that seeks to try to strategize how we would navigate the first 100 days of different types of societal collapse scenarios. Now, I don't claim to be an expert nor an authority figure on how this might play out. However, if you peruse my library of videos on YouTube, you'll see that this is something I've researched and thought about for a long time. Now, throughout that time period, I would hope that my expectations and understanding of what society might look like after a prolonged catastrophic power outage scenario is maturing and focusing more now on how can we actually practically survive one of these situations. That means not getting lost in the world of Mad Max fantasy and fiction, but actually trying to predict with a very realistic and balanced approach how these things might play out. Now, there's going to be a lot of independent variables here that are going to determine whether or not what I'm going to say today is going to be relevant to you. So in spite of the fact that you might live in a different climate, that you might have a different community, a different culture that surrounds you, or even a different season of the year, I'm pretty sure that some of the things I'm going to talk about are universal enough that they'll pertain to you. So for the sake of giving this discussion some context and not being too open-ended in our hypothesizing about what might happen, we're going to assume that an Earth-facing coronal mass ejection has triggered a massive geomagnetic storm that has taken down the majority of the power grid in the Western world. This is a one-off, several hundred-year event that can happen, but it absolutely can happen. I spoke about it in my most recent video. If you want to know more, go and research the Carrington event. Now, to further contextualize this, we're going to say that this happens right now, in spring and summer. Because if such a devastating power outage happened in the wintertime, obviously the lethality would be much higher, and there would be many more challenges that we're going to explore in greater depth in future videos of this sort. Once again, the point of this video is not to predict exactly how things are going to pan out, rather to use this exercise as a canvas to understand the implications of a long-term disruption of services on society. Now, if I was to imagine the first 72 hours of a scenario like this, I would probably be trying to get as much information as I possibly could by whatever means I could, be that police scanner, emergency radios, shortwave radio, normal radio, weather radio. Police scanners nowadays, of course, now they're using a lot of encrypted stuff, so they're not very relevant unless you live in a smaller community that hasn't caught up yet. But a lot of the major cities now are switching over to encrypted digital forms of messaging one another, so that might not be as relevant to use a police scanner, but you can use ham radio to communicate with other communities that might be impacted. The ability to receive and transmit information, especially in this early phase, is going to be critical. You'll probably be able to ascertain within the first 72 hours that we were in fact hit with some kind of electromagnetic pulse, be it a weapon or an actual coronal mass ejection that induced a geomagnetic storm. In the case of the latter, smaller electronics and automobiles will still be running, but the power grid itself is going to be what's compromised in the case of a coronal mass ejection, because the E1 pulse of a high altitude nuclear detonation is what takes out a lot of the smaller electronics, and that really depends on how close you are too. Arthur T. Bradley, who's one of the foremost authorities in the area of electromagnetic pulse research, has indicated that probably only 5% of vehicles would stop working and not be able to be turned back on. Many vehicles would stall, but a lot of them would turn back on, and that's because a vehicle itself has some measure of protection because it is a metal box, so it does provide some means to attenuate the signals. But the longer radio waves caused by a geomagnetic storm would be received into the power grid and likely blow out numerous transformers. But now it's likely that not all of the transformers are going to be destroyed, and there are going to be some places that still have power, and this is where you could probably expect that the government is going to try to stage a comeback from. So the signs to look for then of a geomagnetic induced power outage would be that your cell phone doesn't work, that the internet doesn't work, and that GPS doesn't work, because those three systems are going to be severely impacted because cell towers require the grid, and of course GPS requires satellites, which are highly vulnerable to a geomagnetic storm of this magnitude. Now, it's important to understand that the government is going to attempt to minimize and downplay the severity of any event that happens. And as preppers, we should appreciate this because it's going to minimize panic. It's going to decrease the likelihood that people are going to start partaking in deviant activities and rioting and looting and all the rest. So long as the masses are under the impression that the government has some measure of control over the situation and that order may be restored soon, then they're likely to behave. So if you're a prepper in this situation and you harbor some skepticism about whether or not the government is going to be able to resolve this situation in short order, it's my opinion that you would be wise to keep that to yourself, or do whatever you can to minimize the panic and play into the government narrative with your community, whether it's misinformative or not. Because at the end of the day, you're not accomplishing anything constructive if you are whipping your community into a frenzy and claiming that this is SHTF and that the government is full of you-know-what. You can know that, but don't let everybody else know that. Now, the drawback to this is that if people think the situation is going to be resolved soon, they're less likely to ration their supplies, which may create problems in the long term. But at least this will buy more time and allow for a more incremental transition into anarchy, as opposed to an abrupt one which is wrought with panic and anxiety over the situation. Now, as previously indicated, a lot of resources are going to be allocated to servicing the 100 nuclear power plants and making sure that the spent fuel rods within those power plants are kept cool, because the government knows that if they can't do that, then nobody's getting out of this situation alive. The problem with North American nuclear power plants is that a lot of them are dated. A lot of them have spent fuel rod pools, which are as much as 4 times over capacity in terms of how many rods are actually stored within those pools. This means that a lot of energy is required to keep those rods cool. Now, there are backup generators that can do that for short periods of time, but not for the length of time that would be entailed in a power outage of this magnitude. At best, you may be looking at a few supply drops in your community, but I wouldn't expect a very large-scale, coordinated, and harmonious delivery of emergency services anytime soon. You can expect that as the situation deteriorates, the martial law card will be played in an attempt to maintain order. Now, within this situation, the government may resort to taking extreme measures against people who are rioting, looting, or not keeping the peace in an attempt to keep the peace. This may mean painting people with live rounds, or setting an example, or spreading disinformation about people who get out of line in order to scare people from breaking the law. But once again, the means to enforce that likely is not going to be there unless there is a great deal of support from an outside source or other countries. If you are worried about an intense martial law situation, it's always good to have backup caches of supplies, because confiscation of property is a very real probability should martial law take root. It's important to realize that a lot of people are going to get a rude awakening when they go to the grocery store. Not only is there not going to be any power in the grocery store, obviously they're not going to be able to pay, because 90% of transactions over $100 nowadays are done with plastic. So it's only a matter of time before that situation devolves. Imagine you're one of the hundreds of families sitting in the parking lot, clenching the steering wheel, waiting for them to let you in, or waiting for some sort of resolution to this problem. Eventually, people are just going to start standing up in front of the store. Then it's going to turn to people entering the store against the shop owner's will, and then it's going to quickly spiral out of control unless the owner of the store starts resorting to defending themselves with lethal force. One of the biggest challenges in a long-term power outage is going to be proper sanitation. Not enough people are prepared to endure the first 100 days without a functional toilet bowl. One of the first things you're going to want to do if you own a home and if you have a yard is obviously finding a place in your yard where you can dig a hole and do your business. Now, if you live in an apartment building, you're going to want to get some sort of portable toilet bowl system, and you're going to want to have a lot of plastic bags on hand. Probably one of the most underrated preps for sanitation purposes is garbage bags. If you're a prepper, you should probably have hundreds of garbage bags in your home at any given time. Personally, I have the biohazard waste bags that I would use for that particular purpose, because that's a great way to spread sickness and disease, is not managing the proper disposal of feces post-collapse. And it sounds disgusting, but it's just a fact of life. If you don't properly dispose of that stuff, it's going to attract pests and it's going to breed disease. And you especially don't want that contaminating your water supply. In addition, you'll want to make yourself some sort of solar shower system. Believe it or not, it does not take a lot of water to shower. You can shower with a liter of water if you do it right using one of these solar showers. You can just paint a milk jug black and let that hang out in the sun for the most part of the day. It'll be warm. You soap up before you go under, and basically you're just using the water to rinse yourself off. Sanitation is going to be absolutely crucial, because the last thing you want to do in this situation is get sick. And that should be another thing that you're being far more vigilant about, is not injuring yourself. Because if you injure yourself in this kind of situation, you're going to be screwed. Reduced immunity, infections, any sort of mobility problems, things related to being malnourished or having a nutrient deficiency, all of these are going to make life exceptionally more complicated, and you may not have access to professional medical care. So it's very important that from day one of an event like this, that you are far more cautious and careful when it comes to doing what you have to do to survive. The next thing is taking an inventory of your supplies. It's likely that to last the first 100 days, you're going to need around 150 gallons of water per person to survive that long, in a way which allows for a frugal use of water, but you're not dehydrated, you're going to be clean, you're going to have your needs met. 6 liters a day is what I would estimate is what you need to do all that. With regards to food, the average man is going to need 2,000 calories a day for a very low active lifestyle. For a higher active lifestyle, it's going to be 3,000 calories a day, which it very well may be if you do have to do physical labor in one of these situations. But chances are, if you are a prepper and you have all your ducks in a row, you're not going to have to find yourself doing a lot of back-breaking labor. But then again, if it's winter time, you're going to be chopping wood, and in the summertime, you're going to be doing a lot of gardening, and you're also probably going to be getting much less sleep because you're going to be worried about security. Chances are you're going to need more than 2,000 calories a day. However, in my personal opinion, you should be running a calorie deficit, because the last thing you want to do is be the only person in your community that looks healthy and isn't losing a bit of weight. If there ever was a time to go on a diet, it would be after a grid down scenario. Now, the average man is going to need 200,000 calories across that 100 days. The average woman will need about 150,000 calories, and the average child about 120,000 calories. Now, in my personal opinion, the best food for long-term storage is always going to be freeze-dried food and rice and beans. All you need to do is add water to those things. You don't even necessarily need to cook it. So if you don't want to waste energy on cooking it, and you don't want to attract too much attention to yourself, and you want to maintain that scent discipline so that you're not alerting everybody on your street whose senses are going to be far more heightened. When you're hungry, your senses are heightened. You're looking for food, and your body goes into survival mode, and it triggers certain chemical reactions that are going to make you more hypersensitive to the smell of food, because that's all you're going to be thinking about is food, food, food. So the slightest little whiff of food, people are going to get that, and people are going to know that, hey, you guys have a lot of stuff, give me some of that stuff. Now, another thing is, if you have a dog, you should make sure that you have enough dog food on hand to see that dog through that first 100 days, because that dog is going to be a vital asset in an early warning system for you. Most dogs are going to sense your own anxiety within that situation. Their senses are going to be heightened, and they're going to sense trouble coming probably long before you do. Another thing I would encourage you to do is get to know your community. Check on your neighbors. Don't alienate yourself or shut yourself in, because that just might make matters worse. You want to know what people are talking about. You want to know what the community is planning, because if you're left out of that conversation, then they may be making decisions that are going to impact you, or decisions about what they're going to do with you. Get a feel for the people in your community, who is the most competent, who is the most trustworthy, and try to ally with those people. Now, this right here is a big subject of debate amongst preppers. But if you don't live in a preparedness community and you find yourself in one of these situations, you are going to have to ally with some people. In building these alliances, this may require you to give up some of your preps. Now again, this is going to be an investment, and it should only be with people you've thoroughly vetted and realize that you can actually trust. Because eventually that community may turn on you, and they're going to be far less able to do so with great consequence if you have some support. Now, another thing that I've suggested, which has been a very contentious issue in the past, is that if there is a supply drop, if there is a food lineup like a FEMA truck or whatever the equivalent might be in Canada, the military providing aid, it's important that you go and capitalize on that. Because if people don't see you going to the supply truck, well, they're going to know that you're sitting pretty and you have a lot of stuff and you don't need to go there. So whose house do you think is going to be the target of burglary, theft, and potentially violence? Yours. Now, in terms of home fortifications, I've done extensive videos on this before. One thing I would encourage you to have is sandbags. These are good for barricading doors, and it will allow you to essentially bulletproof a small area if you did have to defend your home. Another thing is, if there's several people in the home, or if you did decide to ally with some of your neighbors, then you should be sleeping in shifts. And even if you do ally with your neighbors, you should probably always have somebody in the home who's awake. You need to remember that at night, it is going to be pitch black. No street lights, no lights in the home. So you will primarily be relying on your sense of hearing in order to know if something is going on. Another thing you're going to want to have on hand is numerous fire extinguishers. The probability for fire in these situations is going to go through the roof, because not only are there not going to be any emergency response teams available to put those fires out, but you're going to have a lot of people, once again, who are cooking in their homes and who are just, doing things haphazardly. There's going to be a lot of electrical fires. So making sure you have some way to put fire out, even if you have an extra supply of water that you can use in a water pump and make some kind of makeshift water hose. Now, as indicated in the beginning of this video, you're going to have to make a judgment call, because chances are all of the people who you care for are not going to be in one place at one time. This may mean venturing out into the gridlocked streets, which will be gridlocked because power is going to be out. So there's going to be a lot of traffic jams and accidents, and you're not going to be moving too much through the cities. So you would be wise to stay to the back roads. If you did have to enter an urban environment, you may want to park your vehicle somewhere on the outskirts where you're not going to be locked into that gridlock situation, and collect the people who you want to collect and hightail back to your bug-in location. Now, as the situation progresses, people are going to become more and more desperate, and the situation is going to devolve. Now, if the government collapses completely, or at least falls off the radar in terms of communicating with the population, then that's when this whole thing enters a world that nobody can predict how that's going to play out, except for the fact that we know that it's likely going to be a very desperate and violent situation before it gets better. If the government can maintain a handle on things, then maybe getting through that first 100 days is going to be the worst of it. Now let's move this conversation into the comments section, and you tell me, what are some practical considerations for surviving the first 100 days of a catastrophic nationwide power outage? I'm really looking forward to reading those comments, because there's always something I've missed. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks again for watching. Canadian Prepper out. The best way to support this YouTube channel is to support yourself by gearing up through CanadianPreparedness.com or BugOutRoll.ca. Premium quality gear at the best possible price using the incredibly secure and easy to use Shopify platform. We offer free shipping to the United States for orders over $200 USD and free shipping to Canada over $75. So support the channel by supporting yourself.